One of the most important things any hobby farmer could ever learn about his property is the makeup of his soil. Really, everything starts with the soil. Whether we're talking about the pasture or we're talking about the garden behind us, the productivity of your farm hinges on how good a soil you have. And one of the key things you should know about your soil is the structure of the soil. Soil is made up of three basic elements: sand, silt, and clay. And so when you're trying to plan and determine how you're going to put amendments in your soil, it's important to know what percent of sand your soil has, what percent of silt your soil has, and what percent of clay your soil has. So how do you figure that out without sending everything off to get a soil test done? I'm going to show you a pretty easy way to do that. So to test the structure of your soil, all you need is one simple ingredient, and that's just a glass jar. And you don't have to go out and buy one. We're just using this recycled pickle jar. So pick a place that you can get mostly soil and not a whole lot of top litter. Step 2, and this depends on the size of your jar, we're just going to fill up this jar with about 3 inches of soil in it. One of the things you need to make sure you do as you're putting soil in the jar is to try to break up as many of the big clods as you can and try to get the soil as fine as possible. After you've collected the soil, the next step is to try to crush it and break it down as much as you can. You can use whatever you've got. You can use the end of a screwdriver, a dowel rod, or whatever, just something that you can kind of get in there and break up all the clods in the dirt. So in this next step, really there's no right or wrong amount of water to add, but as a general rule, I won't add any more water than I have soil in there. So in other words, just kind of make an imaginary line in the jar at your soil level, and then if you'll add about that much more water on top of the soil, that should be enough to do this next step. When you have the appropriate amount of water in the jar, put the lid on tightly and then shake the jar vigorously for about 4 or 5 minutes. Now I know this looks like we're making mud pies, but when you add water and soil to this jar and then shake it vigorously, what we're doing is breaking down all the soil components to their basic particles. Again, it's sand, silt, and clay are the 3 basic particles of soil. And all soil is made up between a percentage of each of the 3. Different plants grow better in different soil configurations, and so what we're trying to figure out is how much clay is in our soil, how much sand is in our soil, and how much silt is in our soil. And by figuring that out, we're better to able understand what kind of soil amendments we need to add to bring our soil to the optimum level to grow what we want to grow and be the most productive with what we want to grow. Once you've got the jar good and shaken up, just set it aside and let it sit there for 2 or 3 hours. So once you shake up the jar and all the soil has had time to settle out, you're going to notice something. Because the sand, silt, and clay particles are different sizes, and therefore one is heavier than another, the sand will silt to the bottom at the very first. And so if you notice here, we've got a layer of sand at the bottom, and then there's a little bitty thin layer between the sand and the clay. And this little thin layer is silt, and then you've got clay at the rest. And then floating on top of the water, then we have the muddy water here, and then floating on top of the water, we have a little thin band of organic matter that was just left in the soil. So we have the sand, the silt, the clay, and then the organic matter. Now you can get really technical with this, and you can measure this and determine the percentage of each, but just to keep things uncomplicated, one of the things we can do is just estimate. So of all the soil here, I estimate probably about 5% of it is silt, maybe 15% of it is clay, and then the rest is sand and a little bitty thin layer of organic matter. Now, if you wanted to, you could send this soil off and get a whole lot more accurate reading of your soil profile and the makeup of your soil. But for just quick understanding, like your garden, for example, of how to add the amendments, then this method works really good. Now, once you've done that simple method of testing your soil composition, it'll help give you guidance on how to amend the soil in like your garden or wherever you're growing something. Now, you can send this soil test off and get a lot more complicated analysis by sending it to a soil lab. But if you're trying to do a quick kind of down and dirty, get a down and dirty idea of what your soil composition is, this is a great way to do it. So now with this knowledge, knowing we've got an abundance of clay in my soil, I can choose to add more compost and really kind of bring the silt level up, or just get some soil from somewhere else and incorporate it into my soil to help improve the structure. And by helping improving that structure, it's going to help improve the overall workability of my soil.